I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for listening, for letting us be a small part of your day, and for joining in these conversations that matter. This podcast isn't just ours, it's yours. We'd love for you to subscribe so you never miss an episode and join our community where you can share your own journey, your wins, and your lessons. And if there's someone whose story you think we should hear, tell us. We're listening. Thank you. In this episode, I dive into one of the most critical and often overlooked drivers of long-term business success, talent. In Always Be Closing, I reframe the famous sales mantra to emphasize that the real close isn't just landing clients, it's closing top-tier talent day in and day out. I unpack the art and science of recruiting, training, and managing people who are not only skilled, but coachable. Learn why identifying potential isn't enough and how your ability to cultivate performance culture starts with aligning your actions, not just your mission statement. Hello again, this is Bo Kemp, and welcome to our podcast, The First Million is Always the Hardest. Today, I wanted to take some time and talk a little bit about people. And so the title of this podcast is ABC, Always Be Closing. That's a quote from a movie Glengarry Glen Ross, which is a great, albeit a slow movie to watch, a really good movie with a lot of great actors that talks about the act of selling. And in this instance, when I'm talking about selling, I'm not talking about selling necessarily to your customers, but rather selling to the people that you're recruiting. The key, in my opinion, of the most successful businesses that I've seen is typically not money, although money is important. It's typically around business and the ability to recruit, to train, and to keep key business people within your ecosystem to drive the success of your business. And finding those people, recruiting those people, keeping those people is even harder than money. And in many cases, the effort that you go through to actually find, recruit, and keep those people is tied to your capacity to generate and to raise money. And so, if I had to really pick one of those two things to focus on, people probably comes in advance of money. And part of the issue that you have to go through is to figure out, who do I hire? Who do I trust? Who do I fire in this whole process? And so we're going to take some time in this podcast segment today to talk through what I believe are some of the things that are really important for you to focus on. We're going to talk a little bit about, as I say, what they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. And that has to do with the act of being a good coach, teacher, which is very similar to the act of being a good parent in some respects. We're going to spend a good deal of time talking about this book called The E-Myth by Dr. Michael Gerber, one of the best business books I think I've read. And it goes through this structure of how to think about um, who you are as an entrepreneur within the context of your business and how that changes over time. And what are some of the things that you need to do, many of which are centered around people, in order to grow your business as the business matures. And then we're going to end the conversation around a discussion of culture and the importance of culture in the business that you're developing, whether it be an investment business related to real estate or whether it be an entrepreneurial operating business, how you should be thinking about culture in the context of the people that you hire and how you manage and run your business. So, people are so important. And a good partnership and good people can drive growth, can help you enhance revenue, help you uh, generate capital. A bad partnership or bad, individual employees can be like a very bad divorce, very expensive, highly painful, can have a lasting impact. And so this idea of what is important around people is really, really critical.
And, you know, I've gone to business school. In fact, I did go to Harvard Business School, which is a great school and a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. But there are many things they don't teach you at business school. And one of them happens to be what I think is one of the key elements of being a manager, which is how to think about the people that you are working with. For example, when you are a really good manager, part of what you have to do is to recognize that to be fair to everybody in the room is not to treat everybody the same. You want to be equal in how you uh, progress those people. But sometimes, in order to give to person A what they need, it's something very different than what you have to give to person B. And what I've found is the best environments to learn how to be a strong manager, which is tied directly to being a strong recruiter, is being a coach, coaching a team, sixth grade girls basketball, teaching, you know, uh, 5 year olds how to play soccer, teaching 14-year-old boys to play football. The experience of being a coach forces you to have to evaluate all of the people that you're working with and really figure out what is the motivation for that individual player and how do I get that person to be their best, which is very different than the player that stands right next to them and the player that stands right next to that person. And this is a skill. It's a skill that can be developed, but it only can be developed in the context of doing something like coaching. Another environment that also provides that is teaching. When you're a good teacher, yes, you're sharing the same material with all of the students. And it's important that you are driving all of the students to get to the same or at least a certain standard of proficiency. But what drives one student to be successful and how you connect with that student to help them learn the material, fully digest the material, and be able to then take the material and make it their own is very different for one person than it may be for the next. What I have experienced is if you want to be a very good manager, teacher, coach, you need to put yourself in environments where you are learning what it is to manage, teach, and coach. Um, and a lot of what it is to be a good manager and teacher and coach is an evaluation of talent. The other part of that is how you actually work with that talent. And another part of that is the recruiting itself. And so the reason that I call this particular segment Always Be Closing is that at all times when you are an entrepreneur or you're developing an entrepreneurial business, whether it's a development in real estate or it's an operating business, you're always searching for talent. You're always on the prowl to find people who can add value to your business, and you're always selling those people on you in one form or another, whether it's you personally, your business, or the story of themselves within your business, because you need to always have a pipeline of people, usually two or three people in any given category that can do the work that's necessary for your business to be successful. Once you actually have identified a person that you want to recruit, one of the other things that's critical for you to do is to actually spend time evaluating that person. What level of talent is that person? Are they a very strong talent? Are they an average talent? Are they a low talent? And at the same time that you're figuring out what their level of talent is, the other thing that you're trying to figure out is how coachable, how manageable, how teachable that person is. Because the evaluation of talent alone will not tell you who to recruit. It doesn't tell you value. It's just one of the components. But a person who, for example, is of average talent, but is coachable, that person is very, very strong hire because you're going to typically need to bring somebody in at one position. And what you're going to need of that person is going to change either as they change, as they get to know the business and perform at a different level, or as your business changes. And if that person is not coachable, your ability to actually migrate that person from one initial set of duties to another set of duties becomes very, very difficult to do. So a person who's average and coachable is extremely strong hire and usually represents anywhere from 60% to 80% of the people that work in your organization, if you're lucky. A person who's of average talent but not coachable, typically that person is a fire. That's someone who either you've identified the fact that they're not coachable early on. People typically hide the fact they're not coachable, so it takes a second to kind of figure out that that's the problem. But over time, average talent and not coachable is a problem. And you need to actually make sure that that person is no longer with the organization over time. The harder situation is where you find someone who's gifted. They're highly talented. And because of their talent, you typically are not as focused on the ways in which that person is not coachable. But once you figure out that that gifted person is not coachable, that person not only should be fired, but that person typically poses a substantial problem for you. And you've got to figure out how to get that person out of the organization. Because remember, they're talented. So they're thinking through many of the issues that are important to you. They're just not coachable. And in those instances, and they are rare, but when they happen, it is just fortuitous, right? That you are finding someone who is both gifted in terms of talent and coachable. You're lucky. You need to keep that person as long as you can. And what it takes to keep that person is often very different than what it takes to keep the person who is average and coachable, right? So let's talk just for a second about what do you do with a person who's gifted and coachable versus how do you work with a person who's average and coachable. Typically, the people who are very gifted, um, they really struggle with being constrained. So if you put them in a work environment where you're constantly kind of looking over their shoulders and monitoring them, they don't have a chance to kind of stretch their wings. They will struggle because they're so gifted and because they are coachable. They'll learn from you from a little while, but that kind of elements of who they are is present to people when they walk around the street, and so there's always going to be people recruiting them to come. And so one of the things that you have to do with those people who in particular are gifted but not coachable is let them know right away that part of what you're willing to do in your position is to actually facilitate their longer term plan, right? Don't constrain them that they can only do this one thing within your organization. Don't try to get them in a place where they don't believe that you'd be willing to foster them moving to another organization. Go the opposite direction and let people know, hey, I'm going to actually foster your ability to take this experience and build it into something that you want for the future. I'm going to help you take your position at my company and parlay that into a new job at a bigger location and a bigger cost than where you are today. Those people who are gifted and coachable are much more likely to stay connected to you if they believe that there's value in what you're providing them in terms of the experience and the coaching before they move on someplace else, as opposed to you kind of constraining them. And this is a mistake that I find people make. I've been blessed to work at some of the places that people have always aspired to work. I had a brief stint at McKinsey in London, the management consulting firm. I spent several years working at Morgan Stanley in investment banking. And these are just two examples of places where people often want to have on their resume. Um, and there are many other organizations like that. Traditionally, an IBM had been like that. Traditional General Electric had been like that. General Motors, some other locations, Ford. Um, but one of the things about my experience, both briefly at McKinsey and my longer experience at Morgan Stanley, is that these places are known as much, if not more, for the people who used to work there than for the people who currently work there. And that's because they're set up as training grounds, that they are hiring the best people that they can find who are hungry, they're gifted, they are coachable, and they're bringing them in and they're putting them into rigorous situations, giving them a good deal of autonomy with some oversight, but putting them on a path so that they're gaining experiences, they're gaining skill sets that they can use and go someplace else. And they're not shy about the fact that people are going to leave. In fact, they set up the whole organization to accommodate the fact that people are going to leave. And they use the idea that people have come to this organization to grow and learn and leave and go someplace else as the recruiting tool to get the next strong, talented, gifted person who's also coachable to come in right behind them. And I have personally found that that is a better model to continually have a pipeline of strong people and to put you in a place where you can ABC, always be closing on new talent, than it is to have people who've been working with you for 20 or 30 years and have never left and have never had the opportunity to kind of spread their own wings. That isn't to suggest that having people for 10, 20, 30 years is not a good thing. It's just to say to continually build a pipeline of staff that you can actually have at your disposal to work with your organization, typically means always putting people in a position to believe that the opportunity to work with you is going to provide them opportunities in the future. Now, how you work with folks that are average talent, I mean, they do good work, but they're not the same level of gifted talented that you might have at some of the other organizations that I mentioned. But that person is coachable. Those are people that tend to stay with you for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, as long as you put them in an environment that feels that they're being supported. And if you can create a supportive environment for someone to be learning so that they feel that they're getting value out of that process, even though they're average talent, you can move average talent from a B minus, let's say, or C plus to a B plus and an A minus over time because they're coachable, right? And because the investment that you make in them actually results in their performance actually getting better and better over time. And usually those people who are average and coachable have some sense that they're average. And because they have some sense, they really appreciate the coaching that allows them to develop mastery in what it is that they do. And that tends to actually have them attribute a strong level of loyalty to you, right? So to get the gifted, but not and coachable people, you have to give them an environment where they feel that this is a stepping stone to the next opportunity for them, and that allows you to recruit more people that are also gifted and coachable. To keep the person who is average but coachable, you have to put them in an environment of support where they feel that they're gaining value from the loyalty that they've made of continuing to work with your organization. Now, you know, I've given you this kind of matrix that you could kind of write up of average and coachable or talented or gifted and not coachable. And you can go through the different iterations of how you bring those things together. There's a really interesting book for those of you interested called The Mafia Manager. I can't remember the author's name, but I'll put it on the website. And the Mafia Manager, instead of using the idea of average talent versus gifted talent, coachable and not coachable, they use smart and dumb. They use aggressive or assertive, and they use lazy. But they get to the same kind of conclusions that I've described if you want to read something in more depth. Getting talent is literally about telling your story. And I think what many entrepreneurs don't recognize is the story is in part about your business, and that's critical. But as much as it is about your business, it's also about you personally. And so when you're recruiting and you're trying to get that talent, whether it be average or gifted talent, to come to your organization, you have to tell your business story and your personal story. And the other component that people often undervalue is that you need to be able to create a picture in the mind of the people that you're recruiting about what their story will be within your business, right? So it's not just, hey, I've had a lot of personal success. My business is very successful, but it's if you come and work for me in this business, this is what your story of personal success is going to look like within the success of this business so that you can tie them to the business itself. When you're really out and you're doing your best job in recruiting, you're telling the story of your business, you're telling your personal story, and you're telling the story of that person within your business. And these are the things that allow you to go and get those gifted and coachable people, which are the ones that are highly prized and probably comprise probably 5 to 10% if you're lucky of your staff, and they allow you to go get the 60 to 80% of the people that are average and coachable. And if you are doing things well, the remaining 5 to 10, maybe at most 15% are those people who are average and not coachable or gifted and not coachable. You really hope that your gifted and not coachable is less than 2%. because more than that becomes a real difficult problem to manage. So, part of what is important in always be closing is to always be coaching. And always being coaching means that you're always looking for talent. You're trying to figure out how to assess talent. You're figuring out how to support talent. You're figuring out how to recruit talent at all times. One of the other things I want to talk about related to people is this book called The E Myth by Dr. Michael Gerber. Um, this is a book that I was introduced to probably 20 plus years ago. He's written several editions of this book, and I think there are several spin offs from this book that exist today. But I'm going to encapsulate a lot of what the book talks about in just a few kind of examples and use it as a way to help you think about how you manage your staff, whether it's in your investment team as part of your real estate or part of your operating company. So, uh, Michael Gerber has this concept that every business starts being essentially three things. Every business person starts actually with three roles. The first role is worker B, the next role is manager, and the third role is architect. And when you start a business, typically you're actually all three of those things at one time. You are the person who does all of the work, you're the person who does all the management, and you're the person who's kind of come up and conceived of the strategy and the process and the implementation aspects. But as you grow as an organization, you actually have to start to give away some of those roles to other people. So, in the effort of you recruiting staff, you actually start to recruit staff that are going to take some of those roles from you, right? So, the first role that you typically take is the worker bee, meaning that you are the person who I'm going to say we make widgets, right? You're the widget maker. You're also the manager of all the widget makers' time and productivity, and you're the person who came up with the concept of selling the widgets, right? So the concept person is the architect, the manager serves as the management capacity, the widget maker is the worker bee. But if I want to grow my widgets beyond what I can do on my own, if I can only make 20 widgets myself, I need to hire additional widget makers, manager, worker bees to do that for me. But typically, what happens is when I bring that first person in, after let's say years of me being the only widget maker, that person's never going to do the job the way that you did the job. And because you've been making widgets for so long, you have a clear sense of how to make a widget. What's the proper process and way? But then you bring somebody in to take on that role from you so that you can focus on management. And the first thing you see is they don't build the widgets the way you do. And your first instinct is to go and stop them. Stop them and say, no, make the widgets the way I do. Now, it's important, as we've been talking about before, that you want to coach people. And so you want coachable people who can take instruction, people that you can teach them, hey, this is the way to build the widget. But if you do too much oversight and you involve yourself too much, what happens is you constrain that person. And as we've already discussed, gifted people don't want to be constrained in that way. They are good to be coached, but don't want to be constrained. Average people, they want to learn, so they do want to be taught, but no one wants to be told what to do all the time. You actually have to allow people to make widgets using our analogy differently than you would make the widget yourself. It needs to stay within a certain tolerance range of widgets, but you have to give them the freedom to do it a little bit different than you. And for many entrepreneurs, their problem is that once they've come to the realization that I can't be the widget maker, the worker, the manager, and the architect, and I need somebody else to come in the worker, that as soon as that new worker starts doing the widget making and doesn't do it the way that they're used to, they want to take that process back. And that typically starts a spiral down the wrong path because then you put yourself in a position where you never actually find a person who can actually serve in that role of widget maker, which leaves only you left to fill that role. And without you being able to elevate yourself and your time to just being focused specifically on the management, you can never grow your business to its maximum potential. Now, if you're successful in bringing on widget makers and giving them the space and the freedom they need to learn, and you've been doing the management for a while, you actually, at some point, in order to continue to expand, need to hire on additional managers. And just like with the process of foregoing the role of the widget maker to now become the manager, you need to forego the role of manager to be the person of architect, to be just that CEO, the person who has that vision. And just like it can be problematic when you've hired a widget maker who doesn't make the widgets like you, it can also be problematic when you hire a manager who doesn't manage exactly like you. Again, you're striving to bring in talented and coachable people, but they want to be coached, not dictated to. And so you're going to have to allow them some freedom to do things a little differently than you may typically do them. And often, this is also a problem. And again, much like at the worker level, if you are not able to let go of the process to some degree of what it takes to make the widgets and let go of the process of what it takes in order for you to be the manager, you're not going to be able to grow your business. And that constraint of the business could be your downfall. And part of what this book, The E Myth, talks about is the process of letting go of each of those appropriate roles and at what time, and getting better and better in doing that, faster at doing that, and more appropriate. So I highly recommend that book. You know, one of the things that's really important in order to be successful in the process of both recruiting, in both managing, and letting go of some of those roles is the kind of culture that you promote within your organization itself. And culture is not what you say, right? It's who you are. And so it needs to be clear by your own actions and activities that you are modeling the culture that's important. In our organization, I've had the chance to build, you know, organizations that are small and nimble. I've had a chance to recruit a lot of very gifted and talented people. And so I've had to figure out this balance between how much autonomy do you give to someone who is highly capable and coachable, and how much oversight do you need to have? And it's much more an art than it is a science. But what we already know is that if you do too much of the autonomy um, and not enough oversight, people don't perform at the levels and the expectations. If you do too much oversight and you're on top of people too much, they feel that they've been dictated to and they struggle with having enough freedom and agency to feel that they're in control. Sometimes the issues around culture have to do of where you're hiring people and in what role, what capacity you're hiring them, whether they're on site, whether they're remote. We live in a world today where many young people really prefer to be remote. And I think for a lot of the older generation, they attribute the idea of being a remote worker to just another way for people to shirk their responsibilities. And I think that that's not fully accurate. There are, of course, always going to be people who take the opportunity to not do work that they should be doing and shirk their responsibilities. But I think for most people, the remote aspect of this solves a couple of problems more than it causes problems. There's a lot of time lost in people's life and commute. There's a lot of time lost in people not being able to take care of some of the basic household things that exist. There's a lot of time that's lost in being not connected to family because you can't physically see them because you're at work. And a strong culture can actually find an appropriate balance between level of engagement physically in the office, level of engagement in Zoom, such that they can promote remote work versus having to have everybody on site. There are instances where you have no choice in this matter, but that's one of the issues I think is really important when you're thinking about culture. Um, and then there is the um, process of determining of your staff who are the climbers and who are the sitters. Now, I want to be clear when I say climbers versus sitters, I mean those people who are aggressively trying to move up and take on more and more responsibility versus the sitters who are people who are typically comfortable in the position that they're in. Now, I don't want to imply by the term sitters that they're complacent. Many people who don't have a need or desire to take on more responsibility, it's not because they don't enjoy being masters of the work that they do. It's just simply that they don't want to take on the additional responsibility. And so they're comfortable where they are. it's important to find the right composition of people, right? So um, you don't want the whole firm to be climbers because you need some sitters to balance out some of those things. You don't want only your gifted and coachable people to be climbers. You want some of your average and coachable people to also be climbers because you want to demonstrate that it's possible to move up the ranks even if you're not gifted. And figuring out this composition is important. And I will just mention the book Good to Great. Good to Great is a classic textbook. And it talks about having the right people on the bus, so to speak. I think there's a tremendous level of truth to that idea and that statement, and making sure that, in particular, you get the wrong people off the bus, right? So if you're trying to build a culture, as important it is that the culture is not what you say, but who you are and how you reflect who you are in terms of your day-to-day actions, it's also a reflection of who else you keep on that bus. And those people who are, as I mentioned before, gifted but not coachable, they're a big problem. You got to get those people off the bus as quickly as possible. Those people who are average but not coachable, you got to get those people off the bus as well. Sometimes you may suffer from and have them for a little while because you can't kick them off really quickly because they may serve an important purpose. But ultimately, you need those people off the bus as well so that the vast majority of the bus is represented by coachable people of varying talents. Now, why is people so important? It's not only the pipeline, because that pipeline is what allows you to uh, change the roles that you play as an entrepreneur, give up the worker bee status eventually, give up the management status so that you can just be the architect. But it's also important because that is one of the drivers often of economic success, of actual sales, the number of people that you work with your company. But there's a bunch of intangible things that come from having good staff. One is that you start to build company capacity. A strong staff, typically, because they're also coachable, has the ability to step in when one or two people have to be out sick or something happens. And that kind of capacity within your company is critically important. But people can also literally have a direct implication in your valuation. I've worked in many industries where, frankly, the evaluation or the valuation of that company was done on the basis of the number of people who work for the company. But even when that's not so direct, one of the important aspects around how valuable a business is the nature of the team itself. And whether it's a venture capital company or private equity company will evaluate the strength of your team to determine, in part, the value of your organization. And therefore, it often can completely impact your ability to raise capital. The stronger your team, the easier it is for you to raise capital. But it often can impact your ability to sell a business. And I think this is an undervalued point by many entrepreneurs that think sometimes by them being the strongest person on their team, that that's a positive signal about how important they are. But the flip side of that is if you're that important and you're looking to sell your business to me, the business doesn't have the same value without you. And therefore, I don't want the business without you. We want to make sure that that's not the perspective of potential investors and others that are dealing with the business. So, just as a bit of a recap, I think of all the things that you do as an entrepreneur, one of the most important things that you do is to always be closing on people, recruiting new people in a pipeline of people. You specifically are looking to bring on those people who are coachable. Ideally, you want those people to be gifted and coachable if you're lucky, but at a minimum, you want them to be at least average talent and coachable because then you can move those people into a space where they can actually perform for you. The key to recruiting those people effectively is telling the story of your business, but also telling your personal story and telling their individual story within your business. And then the key to keeping those people in a place where they are both interested in staying with you and coachable is to make sure that your company reflects the cultural elements that are important to you. Thinking through issues of how much autonomy and oversight do individuals need, thinking about issues like remote work versus on-site work, and then thinking also about your composition of people that are eager to move up the chain versus those people who are perfectly happy to operate in the space where they are. So that's kind of a summary of where I am with folks. If you haven't had a chance to see the show Glenn Glenn Ross, download it on Netflix or whatever your streaming channel is. It'll be a good, fun watch. Plus, there's a lot of nuggets there about really interesting sales techniques and the way to think about people. And so, with that, I'll thank you.
Are you ready to grow your business, build wealth, and spark transformation in the South suburbs of Chicago? Visit southlanddevelopment.org today and sign up for our newsletter to stay connected, get resources, and be the first to hear about the Achieve Summit, where entrepreneurs, developers, investors, and change makers come together to ignite growth and opportunity. Don't just watch change happen, be a part of it. Join the movement at southlanddevelopment.org and start building your legacy today.